Hello everyone, I'm Vincent, the founder of Prime Intellect, and also previously helped start Bio alongside an awesome team that is also at the space. Unfortunately, I can't make it today in person, but so I'll do a brief remote talk, giving kind of like an overview on the one side of what we're building and how you can use Prime Intellect for the hackathon, but also sharing some just general ideas on how to advance scientific progress with scientific agent at this awesome hackathon. So I'll kick it off just sharing a bit what we're building with Prime Intellect. So basically, we're building a platform for, on the one side, accessing compute. So you basically can find any kind of like GPU from NVIDIA on our platform. And on the other side, we're building decentralized training frameworks, reinforcement learning, etc., to really get us to open source AGI and to solve kind of like the accessibility of AI, but then really also to advance scientific progress and in generally universal access to compute and intelligence. And I think in general to also frame like this like hackathon from my perspective, I think really the most important thing in general is really scientific progress for humanity. So basically, I think the chart on the left really like a lot of areas of human progress are driven by scientific progress. So really, I think we've basically need to figure out the best ways, like as part of this hackathon, really on how we can make the most scientific progress in this kind of like short 1 2 week period with the current existing tools and like what the biggest promising tools are that we could potentially leverage. And I think what's useful is to also look at the scientific method and at each area of it, from observation to the researching, hypothesis generation, testing with an experiment, analyzing data, to coming up with a conclusion and asking ourselves like which parts of those can we start to automate more and more with scientific agents, but also where in general will like AI progress help us and which areas of scientific progress won't necessarily be solved just by general AI progress. So I'll touch on three high level areas. On the one side, just like setting the context of some things I would recommend reading to set the setting for what you could build within this hackathon. The other thing is like some of my favorite like AI tools and building blocks, a lot of which you might already know. But then also really just sharing a few project ideas. So yeah, just like high level, I think there's a bunch of also good articles about agents more generally and scientific agents. And I obviously already touched on kind of like this idea of using agents to automate the scientific process and process and really those different sub pieces of the scientific process and scientific method. So I think that's very valuable. I recommend you read Bio.xyz kind of like AI documentation. I shared a link here, and this diagram gives you also like some inspiration for what you could potentially build. Then two other actually amazing pieces. One is this piece on like autonomous science by Mackenzie, really, and she outlines this quite clearly in a similar way that really those areas I also touched on automating the scientific method are really promising to start with. And then there's a great like work by Google on the AI scientist, but also by folks like Sakana AI, which you can check out because they also have a GitHub repo which you can fork and play with, which are basically starting with this premise that you could also automate scientific AI research, as basically it's easier to execute because it also runs on code. So I can recommend this article, but also Sakana AI's article on the same topic. And they break this down also, if you zoom in the different areas that kind of matter, from the scientific inputs to kind of building up this like multi-agent system which can autonomously do the scientific method in essence, and then really use tools and memory and yeah, like basically act as a sort of like co-scientist. Like some of the tools, like obviously for Prime Intellect, like we will sponsor also compute for all hackers, so you can use the code like biohack 2025 for I think it's like $10 compute credits, but then you can also just ping me at Vincent or in the Telegram, and we'll send up to $100 of compute directly to folks in addition. And yeah, I think the other thing that's worth leveraging is the Bio.xyz agent frameworks. You can probably find Sean or catch him in the Telegram or Discord to get you started. And then I think it's obviously really worth playing with like the frontier AI models and APIs. I think specifically I would recommend like playing with the deep research and reasoning models. So basically, actually Gemini just dropped like a new deep research with Gemini 2.5. I'm not sure if it's available on the API, but it's definitely worth playing with. And I think in general, there's more and more really good also open source AI models for reasoning and that could basically serve a building block for your agent. I think the other thing is like to just quickly prototype and build. I would definitely recommend like using one of the AI coding IDEs, basically software like you might already know, like Cursor, Windsurf, Claude dropped also their own coder tool. But then also there's more like web-based interfaces if you're newer to it, like Replit or even like Claude. You can do stuff in browser, and then obviously VS Code with GitHub Copilot is also quite good. And yeah, then I think the other thing is like leveraging scientific tool APIs. So Future House has a literature review agent. I think you might need to ping them to get early access, but then there's also a bunch of scientific models, and NVIDIA has also their own BioNemo platform to check out scientific models. And there's a bunch more that you can find, like for example, the ARC scientific models or AlphaFold that is hosted in different platforms. I think Niklas from LabDAO might have shared some good resources on this, so it's worth looking this up. Yeah, and then I think in general on agents, I think there's three pieces to it basically. So on the one side it's like the architecture you pick, the problem you pick, but it really like it's powered by compute, it's powered by inference, basically using the models, and then ultimately it's about like getting some specific reward, like which could in the case of BioDAOs be, for example, fulfilling specific tasks and bounties even with the agent. But I think that's like one valuable framework. Otherwise, like I think the challenge can become that the scientific agent is just like mindlessly generating, for example, a bunch of scientific hypotheses that aren't really in demand or aren't really needed. So I think directing it towards something that is actually in demand is quite useful. And this leads me to some of the ideas that you could hack on. So basically, I think like among the scientific agent, I already mentioned a bunch of times, but like there's a bunch of things you could build around that, from like a literature review agent, hypothesis generation agent, data analysis agent. All of these things I think work extremely well with current AI tools. I think what's also quite cool would be something like a scientific debate agent, basically having multiple agents and models play different roles to debate specific scientific, for example, like a proposal for a scientific area. I think another one I'm personally quite excited about is also this idea of like starting with a specific outcome you want. Like, for example, you could take something like rejuvenate the brain and then try to reverse engineer from that what could be basically the different tech trees, the basically different research projects and hypotheses of like that could rejuvenate the brain, and basically exploring them. But I also listed a bunch of others that could be relevant, including even like stuff that isn't immediately scientific but still relevant for science, like playing basically like automating other pieces of, for example, a BioDAO. That could also be something like writing up kind of on some of the science. But I think there's a bunch of other things, but I would orient around those. But obviously, yeah, feel free to come up with anything that you think could advance science. But I think really the core thing I would encourage is like iterating quite quickly and just shipping something, and just using AI to like code some of it for you, and really point it at the things you're most interested in and try to just get it running within minutes or hours, and ship it, share it, like post it on X, on social media, or also on in the Telegram and Discord channel to discuss and like sort of form a team to yeah, like accelerate kind of like the scientific agents. And I think there's some like more like prompts, and I think one really um, thing worth taking seriously is that I do think we're on this exponential trajectory of like AI progress, and I think it's worth asking the question of like, what if AI could literally fully autonomously run the whole scientific process? Like, what would that look like? And basically, what are the bottlenecks to get there? And I think it really like the other, I think like mind shift is that really like the scientific method is basically getting a full like autonomy and software upgrade. And it's really just about like figuring out like what are the pieces that might be the hardest to automate, because those will ultimately slow down the whole like speed of scientific progress. Um, yeah, so basically, I think it's worth really taking AI progress seriously in a sense. Like there's some good articles on it recently. Like you can Google, for example, for AI 2027, which is like an article about like potential progress throughout the next 3 4 years. Just painting one like kind of like exponential progress scenario. Obviously, there has been another good article, for example, like called Situational Awareness by Leopold Aschenbrenner. Just like worth basically also understanding kind of like the background of AI progress that plays into this. And then yeah, like last of all, like if you just want to go to our platform, you can just find it on like app.primeintellect.ai. Use like get some free compute. I think you can just log in, and in billing, I think add this coupon, and then you can just spin up any GPU you want. Feel free to also join our Discord or ping me directly with any questions you have. And yeah, happy hacking on the hackathon and looking forward to see all of your projects. Thanks for having me, everyone.